Hello, thank you so much for joining our flower power lesson. We are going to do some flower origami, and through the origami, we are going to look at the parts of a flower and what role they play in the flower plant. And then towards the end, as long as we have time, we are going to look at a video of bees and how they help with pollination and how they find flowers and how they communicate about what plants and flowers they have found. And maybe read a story about pollen and how flowers work and how bees and flowers work together. We are just going to hop right into the flower origami. So up on the screen, we have the list of supplies to gather. Each student should have enough to make their own flower. If you have one of my classroom kits, otherwise, if you're doing this together, just gather whatever supplies you have. And then we will get started. In the middle of each step, I will try to explain the part that our craft item, the bead or the pipe cleaner, is representing, so we can kind of talk about the different uses and the reason that the flower has these parts. But otherwise, just be ready to pause the video at any time so you can stay caught up with the video to make sure that all of our flowers are put together without anyone getting too far behind. So these are going to be our flower petals. Many flowers grow flashy petals and produce unique smells to attract insect pollinators to their rich supplies of pollen or nectar. And nectar is a sticky, sweet liquid on the end of the stigma. And we're going to talk about the stigma later. These flowers trade sweet nectar and protein rich pollen in return for the pollination service that insects perform as they move from flower to flower. Insects don't just pollinate flowers for fun, they are collecting their food. Different insects are attracted to different types of flowers depending on color, scent, and size. Butterflies are attracted to orange, yellow, pink, and blue flowers that have large landing pads. Moths are active at night, requiring flowers that are open and provide nectar at night. Large white flowers are particularly easy for moths to find in the dark. Honeybees see colors on the higher end of the human visual spectrum, including ultraviolet, which humans cannot see. Honeybees tend to prefer blue, purple, and yellow flowers that have sweet scents. So those are the important part of the petals, is to provide the colors that the insects can see. The reproductive organs of plants are found in the flower. The male parts of the flower include the filament, which looks like a stalk, and the anther at the top of the filament, which produces pollen grains. Pollination occurs when pollen from the anther is transferred to a stigma. The stigma is the female part of the flower that is specifically developed to catch pollen grains. Below the stigma is the style. The style is going to be our white pipe cleaner, and the stigma is the yellow bead. So a pollen grain that has been caught by the stigma, the yellow bead, reaches down the style, the white pipe cleaner, to fertilize the egg or eggs in the ovary. And the ovary is actually found deep inside of the flower. We wouldn't be able to see it inside of our 4 petals if we were adding it to our origami flower. This fertilization process creates a seed or seeds inside of the ovary. In some cases, the ovary then swells and becomes the fruit of the plant. Cherries, avocados, apples, and cucumbers are great examples of that happening. About a third of the total human diet, everything that we eat, is derived directly or indirectly from insect-pollinated plants. So this little process that looks so simple when the butterflies and bees are happy flying around all summer long is a huge part of providing food to us. A third of what we eat comes to us with these flowers and insects, their teamwork. So when we put together our white pipe cleaner with the yellow bead, the style and the stigma are put together, we are looking at the female reproductive parts of the flower. And when all of those are put together, it is called the pistil. Now we have added the white beads to our yellow pipe cleaners, and everything has gone up the middle of our flower. The yellow pipe cleaners and the white beads are representing the male side of the reproductive parts of the flower, which is called the stamen. The yellow pipe cleaners represent the filament, and the white beads are at the top, and they represent the anther. So like I said earlier, the filament looks like the stalk, and the anther at the top is the important part, which produces the pollen grain. And now we have our pretty origami flower. Just to talk about the last couple of things that we have added. The sepal is that those green leaves that are at the bottom of the flower. While the flower is actually a little baby bud, that sepal is what is covering it and protecting it while the flower is forming. Then once the flower is ready to bloom, the sepal also opens up to allow the flower to bloom. And we know that the stem is connected to the roots, and that is where the flower gets all of its nutrients from the soil, and obviously also holds the flower up. And then lastly, we added a leaf. You guys just have one set of leaves, but we added our leaves, and leaves are what take in the sunlight to convert the energy and light into the plant's food. I am popping another photo up here on the screen. If you could, as a class, hit pause on the video, go around each of the parts of the flower and talk about what they do, what their role is with our flower plant. That'll be a good review. And if you have your own origami flowers still in your hands, look at the different parts and what pipe cleaners and beads are representing and talk about what role they play with the flower. Pumpkins and other squash and other plants are self-pollinating. That is pretty unique. The flowers on these kind of plants are considered incomplete because the flowers are either male or female. The pollen-bearing male flowers contribute the pollen to the female fruit-bearing flowers. The flowers that we just showed or we have been working with are complete flowers, meaning that they have both male and female parts in the flower. An estimated 80% of insect pollination is accomplished by honeybees. Bees, butterflies, moths, just like we talked about earlier, are great pollinators. A pollinator is an agent that moves pollen. Bees, bats, moths, birds, butterflies, other insects are the most common pollinators, but it can also be wind and rain can help with pollination. The corn that we grow here in Iowa is mostly pollinated by the wind. Farmers must consider whether their crops require special pollinators or what works best when growing their fruits and vegetables or whatever their crop is growing. It's common to see bee boxes in orchards because honeybees are good pollinators for many fruit crops. Once a honeybee finds an abundant source of nectar and pollen, it will return to the hive and tell the others. The bee is able to tell the others how to locate the source by doing a bee dance. I had no idea that this is what happened and this is how they communicated in their beehives. Honeybees have lots of little hairs on their bodies, and a furry bee moving around inside of a flower picks up lots of pollen with that hair. Some of this pollen will be brought back to the hive for food, but some of it will be deposited on the stigmas of other flowers that the bees visit, pollinating those flowers. On a farm, in an apple orchard or other orchards or other fruit and vegetable farms, lots of pollinated flowers will lead to lots of tasty fruit. So bees are an important part of agriculture, and farmers and bees have to work together to ensure the safety of the bees and encourage them to come visit the farms. And the bees then work together to help pollinate and help the farmer grow more fruit. I'm just going to add 2 things here at the end. Next up, we are going to watch a video about the bee dance, and it'll explain how bees communicate with its hive, how to get to a flower patch or an orchard or wherever they are finding good nectar and pollen. And lastly, I will include a recording of a book. Thank you so much for joining our Flower Power video. And we hope you enjoyed learning about the different parts of a flower, how they work within the flower to provide pollination and provide us with fruits and vegetables, and how farmers work with bees and butterflies to help them grow their crops. Thank you.
You've probably heard the buzzing of a bee, but did you know that one way that bees communicate is through dancing? That's right, dance. Well, dance plus a few other cues. Bee dances share information about food like nectar or pollen, water, and tree resin, and about possible nesting sites. For example, when a honeybee finds flowers, she flies back to her nest to tell other bees where food can be found. She brings a sample of the nectar or pollen with her to share with her nestmates. By dancing a certain path and direction and using vibration, sounds, and scents, the returning bee tells other bees where to go. The first dance is called the round dance. The round dance conveys that food is nearby, within 165 feet. To communicate this, the bee runs around in small circles, suddenly reversing direction to her original course. And remember that nectar the honeybee gathered? During or after the round dance, she often gives food to the other workers so they can taste the quality. Bees can do this with food or water. Simple enough. The round dance tells other forager bees that food is somewhere nearby and the bees can find it. But when food is more than 500 feet away, a bee has to communicate direction and distance to the food. For this, bees use what we call the waggle dance. In this dance, the honeybee runs straight ahead for a short distance and returns to the starting point, forming a semicircle. Then she runs through the straight course again. This time, she makes a semicircle in the opposite direction. While running the straight line course of the dance, the bee's body waggles back and forth energetically from side to side. The honeybee also beats its wings to produce a buzzing sound. So how do the other forager bees know how far away the food source is? The amount of time the bee takes to complete the straight run portion of the dance indicates a distance. The further away the food is, the longer it takes the bee to complete the waggle run. For every 1 second of the dance, the food is approximately 1 kilometer away. To get directions to the food, the bees can't just pull out their smartphones. Instead, the followers watch the direction of the dancing bee's waggle run. In the hive, up means towards the sun. If the waggle dance is straight up, the food is straight towards the sun. If the food is in another direction, the bee runs at an angle that matches the direction of the food outside. Outside, follower bees look at the position of the sun and fly the same angle that the dancing bee showed them on the inside of the nest. Bees are so good at this. They can even account for the movement of the sun any time of day and year. All this dancing does pay off, and not just for the bees. About 1/3 of the food people eat comes from plants that depend on bees. Which means we all benefit from this fascinating form of bee communication, the round and waggle dances.
Achoo! Why Pollen Counts by Shannon Bersani. Achoo, achoo! Baby Bear sneezed. He rubbed his itchy, watery eyes and sniffled his runny nose. Baby Bear lumbered out of his den into the warm spring air. His fuzzy black fur glistened in the morning dew. A coat of yellow dust covered the forest outside his home. Yuck! Icky! Why am I so sticky? Huffed Baby Bear. He stretched his sleepy muscles by rolling in a golden field of clover. Valerie Vole poked her head out of her burrow. You rubbed pine pollen on your fur, she said. You have an allergy. Achoo, achoo! I'm allergic to pollen too. Valerie sneezed as she scurried back underground. I don't like pollen, bellowed Baby Bear as he scratched his face and rubbed his fur along the rough bark of a pine tree. It's messy, it's itchy, it makes me, achoo! Sneeze! I wish there was no such thing as pollen. Pollen is more than sticky yellow dust, soothed Mother Bear as she cleaned his fur. The forest plants and animals need pollen. Some animals eat it, and others move it around to help pollinate plants. Each plant makes its own type of pollen. Pollen comes in many shapes and colors. Some make you sneeze, but others don't. In the spring, I catch pollen in my web and eat it for dinner, said Sandy Spiderling as she swayed from a branch. Some types of pollen are light and float in the air. The wind catches the pollen and carries it over far distances before it clings to my silk. Each night, I roll up my web and eat what I've caught. Other types of pollen are heavier and cling to flowers, said Zoe Zebra Butterfly. She reached into a deep flower with her long proboscis. She slurped up the pollen inside. Many insects eat pollen. Ant larvae, Carpet beetles, wasps, and honeybees all think pollen is a tasty meal. Honeybees? I love sweet honey, but don't honeybees eat nectar? Baby Bear asked. We do eat nectar, hummed Honeybee, but bees eat pollen too. We have small baskets on our hind legs that we use to collect pollen. In the hive, we use pollen and nectar to make bee bread. Our larvae grow strong, eating the protein-rich bee bread. Some animals, like butterflies, bats, bees, and hummingbirds, drink nectar from summer flowers. Pollen sticks to them as they travel from flower to flower. Everywhere they go, the pollen goes with them. After the flowers are pollinated, the plant can grow fruits, like apples and berries. Achoo! Achoo! Baby Bear sneezed even louder. He fell backwards onto a hollow log. Crash! Thump! Lily Ladybug, still sleepy from long months of hibernation, flew out from the dusty cloud of pollen. She looked at the messy baby bear and laughed. I snack on pollen in the fall, Lily said. When I can't find any aphids to eat, it has plenty of protein so I can hibernate in the winter. Baby Bear shook himself off. So Sandy eats pollen in the spring, Zoe and Honeybee eat it in the summer, Lily eats it in the fall. Do any animals eat pollen in the winter? Asked Baby Bear. Yes, said Sammy Snow Owl. Pollen floats high in a cloud. It clings to water, which freezes, forming ice crystals. As the ice crystals grow, they fall and form snowflakes. Some animals, like deer and wolves, eat snow in the winter. Who else eats snow? Asked Honeybee. I do. I ate snow when I first came out of hibernation, sang Baby Bear. So I eat pollen too. Pollen is a part of honey, found in snow and necessary for the growth of apples and berries. It's a food for some animals and it helps plants grow into food for others. I guess I do like pollen after all.